Bienvenidos. Welcome. My name is Dr. George Vargas, Curator and Director of Programs at Magic Art Museum in Austin, Texas. Today we present the second lecture in the virtual lecture series dedicated to life and experiences in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, which examines the cultural history and social issues as portrayed by artists in the El Paso, Juarez, and the U.S.-Mexico border region. In 2019, Mr. Juan Antonio Sandoval Jr. donated his vast collection of books and art to the museum. The current exhibition, Mexico, the Border and Beyond, features selections from the Juan Sandoval collection and is on view until August 22nd. A large part of the exhibition concentrates on artworks on the life and experiences in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, which is divided into 5 sections. 5 scholars will each examine a theme. Before we continue, the museum wants to thank our sponsors, and especially the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous contribution to this program. Also, as Jose mentioned, we invite viewers to submit questions and make comments to our lecture who will respond afterwards. Without further ado, the museum proudly presents Land, Fauna, and Allegories, Performance Art and Video in the Chihuahua Desert, a lecture by Dr. Laura G Gutierrez. Dr. Gutierrez is Associate Professor in the Department of Mexican American and Latina Studies at the University of Texas in Austin. Her research focuses on gender, race, and sexuality in Latinx and Mexican performance and visual art. Because of her deep commitment to contemporary art and culture makers, she is on the board of and part of the curating team of the Outsider Fest, an Austin-based queer transmedia nonprofit organization, and occasionally she collaborates with artists. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I present Dr. Gutierrez.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vargas. What a pleasure to be here with you and with Jose and all of the other people tuning in, carving out a space on this Saturday morning, this weekend, to join us. I really appreciate it. I know that our times are odd, so I really do appreciate you joining us. And in addition to my thank you to Dr. Vargas for the kind invitation to be here with you all today and just share some preliminary ideas about this work that I'll be talking about. I would also like to thank Dr. Silvia Orozco and of course all of the staff at the museum that made this lecture series possible. Of course, Jose, but also Mario and Nikki and everyone else that labored behind the scenes to bring this talk today, but in general, the lecture series that we're tuning into these days. I really appreciate all of you and this, again, this very kind invitation. So I am going to go ahead and start to share my screen since I have created a PowerPoint for all of us to look at as I am working my way through some mostly images. I decided not to read a paper for all of you. I think it's sort of an odd way to deliver information via Zoom or Facebook Live. So what I chose to do is just speak in general terms about some material that is really inspiring and also has provoked me to think about this. And again, I want to thank Dr. Vargas and the rest of the team for kind of like giving me the opportunity to think about artists who I've perhaps been thinking about in relationship to other sort of context, but to sort of bring them together and to sort of put them under this umbrella of land, fauna, and allegories in relationship to the exhibit, the sort of the section of the exhibit that is entitled Land, Fauna, and Allegories, because of the fact that it is a very small section with a limited amount of works. I wanted to extend and talk about other artists and put them into that fold of land, fauna, and allegories. So I'll be working with a little bit of performance, art, visual art, installation art, sound art, and then of course video in relationship to the work of these artists that I'll introduce to you today about the Chihuahua Desert. So again, I am someone that has thought about the Sonoran Desert to some extent because I lived in Tucson, Arizona for a while, but I've also written about border art. But I've been culpable of doing something that that I've also critiqued, which is the ways in which we often sort of think about contemporary border art as localized in a very specific way in the Tijuana, San Diego sort of corridor or region, right? So much of writing has been done, so much scholarship has been done in relationship to that particular region, that particular crossing point, that location, right? So, and I've also been writing about that, or have written about in that location. So this gives me the opportunity to think about a location that I hardly ever sort of think about. So I also wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to think about, the Chihuahuan Desert, El Paso specifically, whether it's artists that have that were born or lived in the region or have worked on themes and installed or written about, or I'm sorry, or created objects for that particular location. So again, this is preliminary ideas. So again, thank you for your patience, because this is new material for me. So what I wanted to do is start off, get us sort of going by beginning to talk about a couple of the works, the pieces that are part of the exhibit, that are part of this particular section, Land, Fauna, and Allegories, and then use those as platforms to think about, these are the images, these are the pieces that jump-started some of the ideas of what is going to be the bulk of this presentation, right? So I'm going to go ahead and sort of linger here a little bit with Luis Jimenez's How from 1977. And I was really drawn to the ways in which we have here, all of these components of land, fauna, and allegory, right? We have here, sort of the snow-capped mountains. We have here the, sort of the location of what we can think of as the desert, or, maybe specifically the Chihuahuan Desert, El Paso region. And this animal that's very much part of that ecosystem, right? That is that's howling, right? This wolf that's howling at the moon. It's a full moon. So I also wanted to sort of think about that in relationship to this moment that we're in, this weekend, right? We're stepping into a full moon. And I found that also very sort of pertinent. And I got all sorts of feelings, right? I am one of these people that pays attention to sort of the phases of the moon. And just because of sort of the power that is captured here in Luis Jimenez's How from 1977, I wanted to kind of sort of think about the ways in which this image is not itself a static image. I hear, I feel, just with the words, how written, in a sort of a very dramatic red at the top, that are, kind of perhaps even, we can kind of think about them as scratches, right? That the wolf's hoof were the ones that activated that space, right? So it's visual, but that it provokes us to also here, right? So this is an image to me that carries a lot of sound. And of course, sort of the how is part of that, the sound, right? It's part of that ecosystem, what one hears in the desert, right? And of course, what I'm sort of gesturing towards here are the performative elements of this particular piece, right? That have to do with um, the ways in which sound is carried through bodies, whether these are human bodies or animal bodies, or sort of creatures, mythical creatures, if you will, as well, which we'll get into in a bit. So again, this is a jumping start for my conversation today, but this is a lot of what I'll be talking about and with you this morning. Let's see. I also wanted to, this is another piece from the exhibit, from that section that, is in direct conversation with Jimenez's how, right? Here we have, very similar elements. We have, Zeki Peña, who has written about this particular piece, A Nomad in Love from 2015, as something very autobiographical. It has to do with the ways in which he was moving through some sort of lost love, right? So there's a lot of kind of, again, emphasis on feeling and the ways in which love or lost love sort of activates our senses, right? So, sort of the ways in which he chooses to situate himself within that landscape of, sort of the foot of the base of the Franklin Mountains that are part of that landscape from El Paso, the mountains that, the mountain range that we're very familiar with his upbringing, and also sort of the cosmology around that particular landscape, right? I'm again very interested in this wolf coyote creature that has been sort of transformed, and or the human has been transformed into some sort of night creature that is going to also be expressing those feelings of lost love through, again, how. And we also see here the sort of the text of how that is activating sound for us. Again, in addition to sort of a series of other images, we have here the bringing in of sort of the Mexica mythic narrative of the rabbit on the moon, right? That is pictured on the top right, and then of course the hummingbird that's part of that, the landscape that also has sort of mythic powers or symbolism in relationship to self reliance, being able to be a small animal creature, yet the fluttering of the wings are able to carry the hummingbird in ways that are astonishing, right? So the ways in which Zeki Peña sort of inserts himself and all of those feelings of lost love within that landscape, to me, are also interesting. And again, I want to emphasize the sort of the creature that we have here on the left side, sort of screaming, or maybe even whispering. So it's not as dramatic as Jimenez's, right, piece with sort of how in red. Here it's just sort of a kind of a little bit of a bubble, right, that we have here on the left, whispering to his ear. It's very close to his ear. So again, this also, the imagery here in Peñas's piece, and in conjunction with Luis Jimenez, made me think of some of the work of artists who I'm involved in terms of thinking with, alongside with, and then also writing about in other contexts. So the work that I'm going to be exploring today is work by artists that I'm very familiar with, but it's work that I have not necessarily thought about within this, under this sort of umbrella sort of concepts of land, fauna, and allegories. So I hope that you are with me on this ride with some of these artists. I wanted to start off with Ruben Ulises Rodriguez Montoya, who is a very young artist from El Paso region, El Paso, actually born in Chihuahua in Mexico, in Parral, but grew up, in the region of El Paso and Las Cruces. But very young, just finished their MFA, I think last year. And most of the work that Rodriguez Montoya does is installation work. As you see, these sort of sculptures that they create are, again, I'm drawn to sort of the mythical creatures that emerge from his Rodriguez Montoya's sort of brain, right? What is Rodriguez Montoya trying to tell us about growing up in that desert landscape of the Chihuahua, sort of Texas-Mexico border region, right? I, sort of being in conversation with him and also sort of being sort of a new devout follower of this particular work, I know that the work emerges from this idea that Rodriguez Montoya has of the Nahual, right? Sort of thinking about sort of witches and shamans that undergo this sort of a therianthropy process of transformation that are converted into these Nahuales, but these are sort of mythical creatures for, if you will, the new century. And these are mythical creatures for the new century that can only emerge from sort of a neoliberal, sort of very conflictive zone of the border region, right? It has to do a lot with the ways in which that particular location, sort of not just sort of militarized, but also has endured quite a bit of, there's a lot of sort of racial, or I'm sorry, racist environmentalism that is happening there, right? In terms of the ways in which the factories that have been kind of, sort of that exist along that corridor, and all of sort of the toxicity in the air lends Rodriguez Montoya the possibility for what happens when we inhale these fumes coming from this particular context, this particular location, right? What are these Nahuales, these creatures that emerge from that context look like? They have to be, very sort of grotesque looking. We have to look at them as these creatures that can only sort of exist or emerge from this particular location. So what I wanted to do is linger on a couple of sculptures by Rodriguez Montoya, and I chose Tochli just because one of the aspects that I'm interested in relationship to Rodriguez Montoya's work has to do with, of course, not just the sculptures themselves, and in what I also was discussing in terms of the Nahual creature that is very sort of 21st century. And then, you might be able to sort of spot and see the material that's used is also from that particular location. This is someone that's very interested in horns, in hooves, but is also interested in repurposing the material that is sort of thought of as garbage, right? Detritus from that region is then repurposed, and used to form these creatures for the installations. So Tochli is just one of the many creatures that emerges from Rodriguez Montoya's imaginary. And again, one of the things that I'm drawn to of their work is thinking about the ways that these creatures are kind of apocalyptic, futuristic, and often Rodriguez Montoya writes a particular narrative about the creatures. So there's text involved, and if you visit the website, you see some of this. And I don't have the text here, but I'm just going to take a couple minutes and read you the full title of this particular piece. I have Tochli here from 2020, but the full title of this particular piece is it's called Tochli Travels an Omnibus at night down the Chihuahuan desert to grandmother's house to see Senseias dubbed in Spanish. That's the full title. So that already is giving you a narrative. Rodriguez Montoya is very interested in creating these narratives that emerge perhaps out of a particular biographical experience, yet are transformed into what I called new myths, new narratives for the future of border dwellers, right? And I'll just read a little bit more because this has actually kind of like an almost poetic essay form. And I'll just read maybe perhaps the first paragraph. Tochli slips through the shadowy figures of the night, looking for suntanned scorpions that illuminance under UV lights by using a horn that's bifurcated to become a pincer-like spear. It plunges the tip into the sand to feel the vibrations of passing bird prey. Once a scorpion is located, it levitates forward and shoots out a wad of saliva through its spear to ensnare it, right? And it continues. I won't take time today, but feel free to visit the website so you can sort of learn more about, if you're interested, learn more about this strategy that I find fascinating of Rodriguez Montoya, sort of telling a story that's behind this particular sculpture that doesn't necessarily explain, but is part of that, again, this sort of new myth making that I find really exciting about their work. And, very sort of similar, this next piece called Araceli 23220, also from 2020, which was part of a solo show and installation that Rodriguez Montoya had in New York, entitled, the full title of the show was called Inside the Bowels of the Hoofed Beast, right? So again, taking a material from the desert, taking personal material, taking elements that are familiar with sort of the being Mexican or Mexican American along the border. You see here at, sort of at the center of this sculpture, you see a sombrero, a blue, sort of a light blue sombrero, mariachi hat, right? The big wide brim sombrero here that's been, sort of transformed, perhaps even sort of gutted to actually sort of create the torso of this woman, this Araceli, right? Or is it something else, right? It's depending on how we want to read that, right? But here, sort of the hooves become sort of the legs of this, again, this mythical creature that's very feminized by the name of Araceli. Again, emerging from those locations, right? Often Rodriguez Montoya takes, again, I think I said, sort of repurpose garbage, but sometimes it's very specific, right? Garbage, right? Leftover kind of, a computer boards that, the different maquilas have discarded along the border, and again, repurposes them, right? And again, they gesture towards sort of a futuristic myth-like quality about that region, right? Who are these nahuales? Who are the creatures that Rodriguez Montoya continues to sort of move us towards, right? As very much part of that, again, very conflictive zone that we know we experience, and I know that my colleague, Dr. John Moran Gonzalez, last week talked about the, sort of the creation of the border and everything that instantiates that sort of the limits of the border region and all the conflicts and so forth, right? So here are artists who are very much working within that realm to have us think about what's going on, but at the same time, they are disrupting those particular narratives by creating new narratives. And this is what I'm interested about in terms of contemporary art, right? I think that that's what artists enable us to do, to think and imagine future, and they could be, horrific yet beautiful. Again, this is why I'm drawn to Rodriguez Montoya, because these horrific, these new narratives are horrific because they emerge from a particular context, but it also pushes us to rethink what is beautiful and what is the future going to look like, and how can we embrace, what, we are being transformed into, right? If we continue to, again, inhale fumes and live in poverty and be sort of surveilled, and all of these things are what I think, again, horrific things, right? But the possibilities of, not losing sight of what the future can hold is what I'm interested in relationship to Rodriguez Montoya specifically, but I think in general, the artist that I'm talking about today. And I won't, I know that I have other artists to talk about, so I'm going to just sort of show one more slide featuring this artist that, again, his titles are very, narrative, sort of, they tell a story, in other words. Here, it's an installation that is, actually, I don't have an image, but, there's, the floor is sort of a, topped off with dirt, right? That we can kind of imagine as desert, earth. But again, these are just kind of like materials that come from, his personal kind of, holdings, like socks that have been uprooted, right? But so, has the flora of, the desert landscape. We see the ocotillo there. We see other kinds of personal belongings mixed in with, material from the desert on, sort of a bed of dirt. And then also we have some photographs along the walls of self-portraiture, right? Nudes, again, inserting their own body into the desert landscape and kind of melding, if you will, in sort of a very kind of a gesture, homage to the work of the Chicana photographer Laura Aguilar. I think that that's what I see in Rodriguez Montoya's nude portraiture as well, right? But here very specific in the Chihuahuan desert, not the Californian desert of Joshua Tree and so forth. So again, this is part of that lineage of working with bodies, brown bodies, inserting those brown bodies into that landscape and the ways in which they meld. So that's the work of Rodriguez Montoya. I'm also going to briefly kind of just bring in, I think, someone that is in some ways also, working with kind of a similar ideas, these sculptures that are, installed. And I know that Mexicarte has hosted Jose Villalobos in the past, and people are perhaps much more familiar with Villalobos's work. But, very specific, the ways in which Villalobos is also using dirt, is also using kind of, elements or symbols from, sort of the region, right? Particularly fashion, right? So, as opposed to Rodriguez Montoya, that's interested in socks and other kinds of things that are not specifically thought of as, kind of a Mexican masculinity. Villalobos, because they're interested in critiquing Mexican masculinity from within, kind of like a sort of a self-referential, very autobiographical work that we see Villalobos also enacting here is interesting, right? Also, I'm drawn to the multimedia aspect of all of this work, right? I think that I am usually drawn to work in terms of a researcher, and also, in terms of being a fan of work that mixes different mediums. And I like how these installations bring in dirt, but also have photography. And then, the ways in which Villalobos here is writing on leather, and that leather strip, in terms of, these hands are not, man's hands should not be as soft as this strip of leather, right? So again, trying to deconstruct Mexican masculinity by continually bringing references. And, and we know, Mexicarte knows that Villalobos also works on with performance. And we'll talk about that in a bit, in a bit. Another artist, this is someone that I've written about extensively, taught in my classes, and very familiar with Sandra Ibarra's work. But Sandra Ibarra, is currently located in Northern California, just finished an MFA out there, but is, from El Paso Juarez region, right? And always comes back to that region. And much of what the work that she does stems from that experience of having grown up in that particular location, right? So she's, she's a Tejana at heart, even though she's been in California for a while. And I just want to talk about a couple of her pieces. One of them is the Spic Ecdysis series. It's a photo essay. So it's a series of photos that Sandra Ibarra creates in 2014, 2015, where she stages, these photos to indicate the shedding of the skin, right? So again, using these processes that many of the animals, particularly snakes, but also cockroaches, undergo this kind of shedding of skin, the stripping off, right? So she uses that as a metaphor or an allegory to think about her own skin. In particular, one of the things that she's doing here with Spic Ecdysis is to attempt to liberate herself from the sort of the, if you will, the kind of the baggage that she herself constructed when she created her performance alter ego called La Chica Boom. So Sandra Ibarra is known in some circles as La Chica Boom because she was wanting to think about and critique Mexican femininity, right? Much in the same way that Villalobos is critiquing Mexican masculinity. Here, Ibarra, with her persona of La Chica Boom, is wanting to do a kind of a critique of sort of the baggage that women, Mexican women specifically, carry to sort of have to perform, a notion of Mexican femininity. So La Chica Boom, is this character that did a series of performances called spectacles, right? So she's working with spic, the derogatory term, along with the notion of spectacle. So she would perform live. Most of these were live performances. There might be some video out there, but there was a moment in which, Sandra Ibarra was too close to that persona, and she wanted to sort of separate herself from that particular persona that she had created. Also, it became tiring, and it's like, what do I need to shed that skin, right? So the series, the rest of the series, has different kinds of costumes that she herself used to perform La Chica Boom as La Chica Boom, and then kind of like leaving them on the different locations. In this particular case, on the border, on the actual El Paso Ciudad Juarez border, right? And this is why I'm using this one. The other ones are in different locations, right? So, again, it gestures towards, sort of transformation, which I'm also interested in relationship to all of the artists here today. But what I'm also interested in is in the ways in which Ibarra herself undergoes, through the process of this work, and all the sort of the staging of, sort of the shedding of La Chica Boom's, costumes, realizes that, as a Mexican woman, as a Chicana, she cannot shed the skin. She cannot shed, it's a process. It's a continuous shedding of skin, but another layer of skin is there, right? So then she acknowledges the fact that in so many ways, she's a sort of a cockroach-like figure, right? So the rest of the series also has images of her alongside, kind of this costume of, of a cockroach. So the skin of the cockroach is left there, and she's sitting or laying there next to the cockroach skin to say, as much shedding as we do, a new skin emerges, a new layer, and we continue to be brown, and we continue to be, disregarded and vilified for who we are, in this particular region. So, just briefly, I'll go through a couple more of the artists. Ibarra, in addition to these live performances like Chica Boom, the photography, has also done installation work and has also done video work, right? So I'm going to just briefly jump to the next slide. This is a video that Ibarra did called La Corrida, sort of the running, which is literally her running. This kind of is a video collage that uses images from the sort of the crossing point of the El Paso border port, but also it's her running alongside the border. And I'm just gonna, it's a video, and I'm just gonna show you just a few seconds of it, since we're running out of time. Up the volume, piss, 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 Oops, sorry. It's only a couple minutes long. You can go to Ibarra's Vimeo page to see the full video. Again, I said it's under 3 minutes long, but it's also, as you see here with the dates, it's from 2012 and 2018, right? The 2012 version actually is a 3-channel video that was installed in sort of gallery museum space, or has been installed in different gallery museum spaces, but that sort of features those videos projected onto the wall with a thread mill, right? So that the people, the spectators who want to sort of also run alongside her can also do that, right? This particular version, the 2018 version that we just saw, is a version that is more sort of for video, for consumption, just like on Vimeo, as opposed to the other one, right? So she continues to sort of refine the work for the different spaces that she's working with. So, sorry. So the next artist that I want to talk about is Carmine Escobar, who's a actual sort of an extreme vocal artist from Mexico, currently residing in LA, but works in different locations because the work travels and she travels. And this particular performative installation was done at the Ruben Center in El Paso, called Un Lugar de Paso, sort of a place of passage. So again, indicating here the El Paso Juarez region. But what Carmine Escobar, because she's a sound artist, what she did was that, she used the gallery space, brought in sand to cover a sound installation that she had done with contact mics and also recordings that she had collected, testimonies, if you will, from people's experience of having sort of crossed the border or having sort of lived in the El Paso, in the city of El Paso. So these testimonies then were on the floor of this space that was then activated. The recordings were activated with the people's movement of that space. So the audience are the ones that activate the piece themselves, right? And I'll just show you briefly so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Let me play.
It sounds like it'll inhale, like se llama Ulises, and then release acá el paso, like before it takes 10 años. It sounds like it's very silent. La experiencia fue bastante diferente. O sea, el tren siempre ha estado en mi vida. Yo creo que fue algo que conectó ambas vidas. Claro está.
So just again, this is we don't have a chance to look at at all of the piece. It's also 2-3 minutes. It's sort of a trailer because it's a performative installation. The place itself is transformed depending on the visitors, whether they want to sort of use their breath to kind of create these small windstorms that are reminiscent of the desert landscape, or if they're want to sort of trace with using colored sand, trace their movement that then is sort of kind of transformed because someone else is going to be in transit of that particular space. Always, sort of thinking about sound, whether it's the train or whether these testimonies, and then this is projected outside of the center, right? So it's sort of a continual, or was an installation that was continually being transformed. And that's one of the things I'm interested in, sort of the ways in which these artists are particularly activating space. And I'm gonna, just end with a piece that I don't know what it looks like, but I just pulled some images going back to Jose Villalobos, this performance that took place last weekend, but is still, I guess, was recorded, and Art Pace in San Antonio will soon have it up as part of Jose Villalobos's solo show there, right? But I was interested in how this particular location is also informing Villalobos's, sort of extending, the previous work that we've looked at that was very specific to, again, kind of like trying to deconstruct this sort of toxic Mexican masculinity. Here, what Villalobos is going to do, or did last weekend, was to sort of think about the ways in which there's a lot of performance happening, and the performance of the border, as again, Dr. John Moran Gonzalez said last week, is particularly, the border is created because of these performances, whether it's sort of the Border Patrol truck that we see on the top image that is, sort of clearing the space, smoothing out the ground, right? It's part of the ways in which the border sort of image, or the idea of the border, or the border itself is constructed. It's continually being performed by the people that are activating it. So Jose Villalobos decides to also do this kind of ritual of also smoothing out the ground for their particular performance that has to do with the water and the ways in which we carry water with us when we cross that border. And again, I only have these still images, but I'm very interested in sort of continuing to think about what happens in that particular region and the work that these artists are doing. And I think I'll end it there so that we have enough time for some conversation. Does that sound good?
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. That was wonderful. It was an interesting, illuminating lecture. Jose, do we have any questions or comments from the viewing audience at this time?
Not yet, but if anyone listening has questions, I'm checking out both Facebook Live and here on Zoom. So yeah, feel free to ask questions. Good.
I want to make a comment to Laura. I really appreciate, as an art historian, your description of iconography. Too often, we don't take the time to really look at the artwork and describe it for those that don't have this kind of language and the experience by which to translate it to a common language that we can all understand. So that was really awesome the way you did that. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, which was, one of the reasons why I did not want to read an academic paper was so that I can concentrate on the images, and I wanted the images themselves to sort of guide me in terms of what I wanted to say and kind of relay to the audience. Because I pay attention to the pieces and I want to know what kind of work that the iconography is doing right for us, because it carries so much. These are references that we all see, but we don't often kind of like linger, and in terms of we don't linger kind of like to think about the implications of their symbolism.
All right, we have a question here that says, are there other kinds of border art being made in other countries?
Wow, that's a great question. And I would venture and say yes. I mean, I think, the fact that I mean, there's so many borders. There's so many sort of geopolitical borders that, again, I'm going to go back to the lecture by last week, or was it last week or 2 weeks before, by Dr. Moran Gonzalez, that was, sort of talking about the non-specific aspect of, I mean, when we think about the border, because where we live, or because of our own experiences, we often kind of like are always sort of thinking about the US-Mexico border, right? It is one of the largest sort of borders, or longest in terms of size of the world. Yet, and then the art that emerges out from sort of that context on that conflict of sort of the people that inhabit that region, makes me think that, or could make one think that, it only exists, for us and among, but I don't have the answer. I think I'm just kind of like rambling, because I want to think of examples, but I can't. I mean, I can think of, the Dominican Haitian border, right, which is closer to the context that I work with, right? There is a lot of work being done, particularly in music, or and also in literature. I'm thinking about the kind of like the sort of the Palestine kind of wall, right, too, as another sort of border region. A lot of work has also been done there, photography, sound work. I'm sure that if I continue to sort of think in my brain, I can come up with more. Sorry, that was my timer.
Fine. Awesome. Another question. How would you consider how artists get inspiration for the mythology aspect for the art pieces? And how can we separate the mythology aspect from the more modern aspect?
I mean, I think artists have, I mean, I don't want to sort of pretend to speak for them. I I imagine, I'm imagining this answer, right? Because I'm imagining that the artist, just like all of us, right? I mean, just as an academic, I have certain kinds of inquietudes. I have kinds of questions I want to ask the world, right? Because these are things that are kind of like sort of burrowing in my head in terms of like trying to make sense of something. And what am I trying to make sense of, right? Most of the time I'm trying to make sense of something that is very much related to my own biography, right? The ways in which I'm very interested in kinds of questions of race and sexuality in the context of Mexico and the US. It's because it's also sort of very self-referential, right? What are these things I want to know, and I want to have answers to? So I do it through research. I do it through kinds of, like reading, you know, um, voraciously to trying to find these answers, right? This is, and then write about them and sort of process them through writing. I would imagine the process of artists is very similar. It's like, what are the things that are gnawing in my head that have to do with me, right? Or they have to do with the things that I'm concerned about, right? So I'm concerned, about, environmental racism along the border. So I'm going to then think about that and try to manifest it in a way that makes sense to me. But these artists continue to do work. It becomes less about having a piece kind of answer a question, but it becomes part of the process of trying to get at the answer that I don't know if we'll get to that answer specifically, right? What is ultimately going to be the answer that's satisfying to me? I don't know, right? And I think artists work in a similar vein, right? Again, I'm speaking for them, but I think that it has to do with kind of like the gnawing questions in our brain that ultimately, and we all kind of express ourselves in different forms, right? And we might express ourselves, differently. It doesn't have to be academic or artistic. We all have, these things that, you know, make us do things. It makes us, yeah. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah, it was a good, challenging question.
Yeah.
Another one from Javier Morin asking, did Sandra Ibarra's shedding resemble also the iconic image slash colors of the Virgen de Guadalupe?
Thank you for that question, Javier. I think that the image from Spic Ecdysis that I showed, definitely, I mean, the costume that we see there is resembling of the Virgen de Guadalupe, right? So the Virgen de Guadalupe as one of the sort of the primary figures that is supposed to model a notion of Mexican womanhood, right? So Sandra Ibarra used that costume in her spectacles, right? So definitely, because she was working through Mexican femininity, she had to bring in, among other kinds of, she brought in, sort of the sexy, waitress with, with her, with her dress kind of like resembling kind of a China Poblana as part of the iconography that she's drawn to, or that she wanted to bring in and question, right? So just again, as Jose Villalobos is questioning Mexican masculinity, Sandra Ibarra is questioning Mexican femininity. In this particular case, the Virgen de Guadalupe is one of those kinds of references that she has to kind of like there's so much baggage in terms of like thinking about what, growing up as Mexican women, girls, right? How we're supposed to model ourselves and our behavior in the Virgen de Guadalupe. And that's a lot of baggage for us to carry. And Sandra Ibarra is saying, let's remove that. Let's remove that from our bodies, right? Let's not carry that because it's sort of weighing us down, and we're never going to meet the expectations that are, they're actually constructed by society and culture, not necessarily, something that is religious by any means, but these are kinds of expectations that are constructed by, by society and by the sort of the cultural apparatus. So yeah, I hope that answers Javier's question. But yeah, I didn't bring that aspect of the costume. Thank you for pointing that out, Javier.
Awesome. And then another one by Javier, might be our last one, says, is this somehow related to the violence against women at the Maquiladora worksite? I'm guessing the same one.
Yeah. I think both the this big ectasis, but then also definitely La Corrida, right? Is just like how, she's just like ferociously running that path, right? Like what does it mean for women to run free or free themselves from the constraints of the particular region, right? The violence against women, whether it is working in the maquiladora industry or just other kinds of things that are very constraining to women and women's movement. So the corrida, the running, the liberating herself was a gesture towards like wanting to escape those political and economic constraints put on women's bodies, for sure.
Well, also when you were talking about the Howl and the Zeke Peña Nomad in Love, I mean I see them every day, and you made a really good connection that I hadn't really thought of, which was the how they're both kind of how bodies and animals and are like vessels of the sound, which I thought was pretty cool, because we have that piece is actually augmented here at the museum and anywhere that if you have the app of Augment El Paso. And it was really cool because we're filming like a virtual tour, my colleague and I, Nikki, and we included like a recording of the how, and I have it here, so I might show it just so you can further relate like the connections of the pieces real quick. Let me see if I can.
Thank you.
Show that. Yeah, I thought it'd be cool to share with everyone. Yes. Yeah. So the Augment Apple Paso, we've been working with them for not just this exhibit, but they've augmented our murals outside. And so I also have friends who own the print, and they didn't even know that they did things like that. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, when I did the walkthrough with Dr. Vargas, I did not know about it. And then I read about it on the website. And I'm like, wait, I have to go back and do this because I really do think, I mean, immediately when I saw those prints that's what I heard, right? Had I known, I would have downloaded the app. But thank you for that. I'm going to go back to the museum and with my app in hand.
Yeah, definitely check it out. All right, well, it's about the time we have for today. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. Thank you, Dr. Vargas. Dr. Gutierrez was very insightful. I'm gonna check out more of Sandra Ibarra's work. I feel like I wasn't so familiar with it, but Villalobos, yeah, a little bit. But yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in.
And before we close, I'd like to mention something, please, Jose. Before we close the program, we invite you all to hear our third scholar, Dr. Gilberto Cárdenas, on April 3rd, Saturday at 11 p.m. He will present I Am Immigrant, You Are, Borders, Migration, and Art, the U.S.-Mexico Border Experience. And on that note, we say adios, goodbye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.